Hello, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us again for Making Sense of the Crisis. I don't even know what week we're on. Is it week 10, week 11? I'm not sure. And as we have gone through each week, we've tried to stay apace with where everybody is at. We've tried to use this program, this slot, if you like, as an opportunity and an alternative to what is in the mainstream, because very often the mainstream isn't elevating the voices that we need to hear. And tonight is no different. Tonight is an education special. You will have seen a lot in the media uh, from from some of the mainstream media, attacks on teachers, on parents. And tonight we want to hear from those teachers and those parents about what they think the right way forward is, about whether the easing or the kind of widening of participation in schools on the 1st of June is right or not. And I hope you stay with us for the whole programme, because the contributors tonight are absolutely brilliant. We've amassed hundreds of thousands of views on all of the different programs that we've done so far. If you have not seen all the other programs, they're all there on the People's Assembly page. Please go and watch them. All sorts of issues have been covered every single week. I'm going to say it again, I know it's so boring, but please will you share this programme? We want to grow the People's Assembly to the broadest audience possible. And that is possible if you just share this programme. If you share this, it'll take a couple of seconds to do that now. A couple of announcements before I introduce the brilliant speakers for tonight. So the People's Assembly runs predominantly 99.9% on the excellent work of volunteers, and campaigning, production, having designs, memes, all of that out there. It takes a lot of work. And the People's Assembly are also running very seriously short of money. So if you can donate anything to the People's Assembly, and obviously I'm only talking about people that have got anything spare right now, that would be very much welcome to allow us to keep going in this crisis. And as we emerge from it, please watch out for the crowdfunder that's going to be out at the beginning of next week too. I think you'll all agree that a political low point of this week has been the immigration bill and its passage through Parliament, which saw so many of the issues that we've been talking about highlighted, and I suppose just the disgraceful way that once again low pay is conflated with low skill. Those people that are now being called key workers, being deemed as low skilled, assigned points, and essentially deemed not welcome by this government. And amazingly, I think just over an hour ago, the Prime Minister, because of public pressure, has rolled back on the NHS surcharge. So the charge for those NHS workers and the surcharge that they pay, it should be, of course, widened to everybody. Nobody should pay for that service in this country. But that is no doubt. No doubt about it, that is because of public pressure. So well done to all those trade unions and activists that pressured the government on that. Tonight, we are obviously focusing on education. And you'll have seen some terrible, terrible attacks on teachers in our papers. Headlines like, "When will they learn? Let our teachers be heroes." And we know the connotations that goes with that and the sacrifice that you have to make to become a hero. And tonight we want to elevate the teachers and the parents' truth. Our first contributor is going to be Daniel Kebede. He is the vice president, one of the vice presidents of the National Education Union. Before he speaks, hit share. Over to you, Daniel Kebede.
Oh, thank you very much, Laura. I just want to start by saying, really, I don't think any of us who work in education, who care deeply about the young people that we work with, are particularly comfortable with the way our sector's become this battleground, actually, over COVID-19 policy. We all want to be in our schools with our classes, with our full classes at the earliest opportunity. We don't become educators for a love of money. We very much do it because we love our jobs, and we want to make the difference to the lives of the young people that we work with. We want to educate, but it is widely felt amongst our members that there should only be a wider opening of schools when it's absolutely safe to do so. But what is becoming increasingly clear is that there are other interests at play that go beyond the wishes of our pupils, of our parents, or our educators. There's a drive from government and those enabling their strategy in sections of the media to get Britain marginally profitable again. And for some of those people, that is profitable at any cost. Now, we've been consistent in the National Education Union that we want to be led by the science and the evidence when it comes to a wider opening of schools. Now, that's a reasonable request, we believe, when you consider that schools in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland will be remaining closed until their next school year to minimise COVID-19 transmission. It's a reasonable request when you consider that there will be no wider opening of our highest paying state schools, Eton, Harrow, Winchester. So why should state schools in England be any different to the rest? Now, according to the government, tomorrow they will be answering our demand and publicising the science behind their rationale so it can be fully scrutinised. So we'll have to see if it eases concerns. But what is sure is that setting arbitrary dates like June the 1st are unhelpful. Setting dates go nowhere to answering the key question, which is what is required for a safe return to schools. So we set out as a union 5 tests that we believe need to be met before a wider opening should be considered. So number one, we'd like to see a much lower numbers of COVID-19 with the number of new cases on a downward trend. Number two, a national plan for social distancing put in place by government, including parameters for physical distancing and social mixing in schools. Number three, a comprehensive and effective system of testing, tracking and tracing, which we are still yet to see. Number four, there would need to be a whole school strategy on dealing with outbreaks. And number five, we'd like to see protections for vulnerable staff. Now, we're not alone in this thinking. We have the support of the 5 tests from our medical professionals, from our doctors in the BMA. We've seen support for the 5 tests from the Shadow Education Secretary, along with many other MPs. We've seen multiple councils this week, from London to Islington, including Conservative councils such as Solihull, also calling for wider opening only when it is safe. And we've seen 425,000 people, many of them parents, sign our petition for there to be a wider opening only when it is safe. Now, I think one of the greatest indicators of how widely it's felt amongst our profession that, a wider opening of schools would be reckless, that it would be dangerous for our children, our colleagues and communities, it is very much indicated by what has happened to our union over the recent weeks. We've had over 10,000 new members, hundreds, if not thousands, of new reps, and 20,000 members this week taking part in a Zoom call to hear from our General Secretaries, Kevin and Mary. So, we believe that those who oppose our very reasonable demands and very reasonable questions are really in a minority. But I do want to finish by saying this week I've been listening to Good Morning Britain, to hear what Piers Morgan and others are saying. And this week they had someone claiming that opening schools more widely was a risk worth taking because only 2 children have died. Only 2 children. That's what the phrase was. I'm sorry, that's too many. The lives of our children, of our colleagues, of those who live in our communities, including our care homes, are infinitely more valuable than the biggest shareholder dividend or CEO bonus. So please just continue to support your teachers, your teaching assistants, your schools, the National Education Union, because this is genuinely the fight of our lives. So let's keep raising the demand that the government should do away with the arbitrary date of the 1st of June and only commit to a wider opening of schools when it is absolutely safe for our children, for our colleagues and our communities. Thank you. Cheers, Laura.
Thank you so much, Daniel. The comments are already streaming in. One person, Kerry, said that her 3 autistic children are not going back to any educational environment until I know it's safe and their teachers are being told that it is safe. And I think that's what we're working with right now, isn't it? There is not a feeling of safety amongst parents or teachers. And unfortunately, those people that, some of those people that are like desperate for schools to open, lots of the drivers are really financial, where employers are saying you have to come to work, where the government has been ambiguous about whether their workplace is essential work or not. And I think you were right too, Daniel, to say, you know, at the minute, schools, teachers are in a position where you are kind of the roadblock to the wider opening of the economy. But what your union has done in terms of widening participation seems incredible. Is it the largest trade union meeting that you had, online trade union meeting that you
Yeah,
had this
quite
week?
literally in history. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. So thanks so much, Daniel. I think that I saw on Kevin Courtney's Twitter today, shared from the 14th of May, the Office for National Statistics, and they tweeted that there is no evidence of differences in the proportions of individuals testing positive for COVID-19 between the different age categories. And that's what we're hearing so much of, that actually there's this feeling, oh, well, it might manifest differently in children, or we don't really know whether children spread it as quickly or whatever. Actually, we have so many unknowns to this virus still. And as you say, one child dying is too many. And I'm going to come over now to Cara Bryan. Could you just hide yourself now, Daniel? Thanks so much. Cara is a parent, and I think we are really, really keen to hear from you, Cara, about your opinion. Are you sending your child back to school on the 1st? If we don't build enough pressure, I think we will. But would you send your child back? And what are your
No, if I have anything to do with it, my child won't be going back. So yes, he is in one of the year groups expected to go back next month. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, like me, most parents will be only too happy for their kids to go back to school. That is when and only when we're completely satisfied that it's safe for them to do so. So as a parent, I'm not satisfied that it's safe. Anyone who's ever met a 5-year-old knows they cannot observe the simple instruction, don't touch. You know, they can't remember what they were told 5 minutes ago. They have an extremely limited attention span when it comes to instruction. And as every parent knows, they don't always listen the first time. They do touch, they lick, they pick their noses, you know, they put things in their mouths. They can't seriously be expected to observe social distancing. For that reason, every school in the country has regular and frequent outbreaks of head lice and threadworms. And if schools can't stop the spread of nits, then how on earth can they be reasonably expected to combat the transmission of a killer virus? How can teachers be expected to maintain social distancing? Are they to ignore their instincts as carers and insist upon observing 2 meters when a child falls in the playground? So they won't bandage scraped knees, wipe snotty noses, or pick up and comfort our children when they fall? You know, the teaching unions recently polled 30,000 members. Only 5% believed it was safe to return to schools. How can parents be confident in sending our children back when our teachers are afraid? How can parents be reassured when Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have clearly distanced themselves from Whitehall and departed entirely from government policy by keeping the schools closed? The rate of infection has increased. You know, on the day the government announced the schools would close on the 18th of March, there were 2,626 cases and 104 deaths. Today, that figure stands at 250,000 cases and almost 40,000 deaths. And those are the government figures. We know those figures are significantly higher in reality. And let's not forget, you know, as teachers and parents together, how hard we fought to close the schools in the first place. This government is determined to get children back to work, because the simple truth of the matter is that schools provide daycare facilities for working parents, and they want to restart the economy. Schools have remained open to key workers' children, and during that time, we've already lost nearly 70 teaching staff to COVID-19. A primary school teacher who's been teaching key workers' children has written a letter to her MP, Julian Sturdy, accusing the government of putting people's lives at risk. She writes, I won't read the entire letter, but I just want to read you this little passage. She writes, your proposal to open schools in June will cause suffering and death. It is that simple. You are putting the lives of children, parents, and grandparents at risk. I am a parent, and with your lack of provision and care, you are asking me to knowingly increase the likelihood of becoming infected. You are therefore asking me to knowingly increase the risk of infecting my own children. The Education Secretary promised back in April that schools would only reopen when the scientific evidence indicated it was safe to do so. In fact, the government has been robotically repeating the mantra following the science since the beginning, in spite of damning evidence to the contrary. And we've yet to see any evidence to suggest the government has followed any science at all. We need data, not arbitrary dates for returns to school. We need to see actual peer-reviewed science. We're still waiting for the government to roll out an effective test, track and trace system 3 months later. As a parent, I want to see the 5 tests put forward by the National Education Union that were endorsed by the British Medical Association satisfied. Then and only then will I feel safe as a parent sending my children back to school. This government has failed on testing. It's failed on track and trace. It's failed on PPE, failed care homes, failed the NHS. And if we let them, they will fail schools. This government is gambling with people's lives, and it will be our children, not those from privileged private schools like Eton and Harrow, who will pay the ultimate price. We need to shout loud and clear, our kids are not your lab rats. So to other parents watching, I would ask, on June the 1st, stay away, stay home, save lives.
Thank you so much, Cara. I think you're absolutely right to talk about how unhygienic, shall we say, children can be sometimes, especially in the year groups in the much younger years that they've chosen to go back. And just last night, I mean, my 2-year-old was like sick in my hand at the table, and I just thought that, you know, but in a kind of educational setting, that would be a worker that would be placing at risk. You can't tell your child not to do that, or to, not put their hands in their mouth when they're so young. It is about retraining those children. And I mean, so often on the social media threads, or when you listen to parents, as you mentioned, guinea pigs were not being guinea pigs for the rest of the UK even. So absolutely spot on. And how harrowing that already in this profession 70 lives have been lost. We can't just become desensitized to that level of death. And I'm going to just come to some of the comments now before we move on. Somebody was saying, and I do agree with this, Sarah Pryor said, many parents I've spoken to don't see the point of sending children back to like a childcare style provision. It's not safe. Plus, we shouldn't we wait until they can provide somewhere that's conducive to education? I mean, I'm sure you don't want to just kind of throw your child into a setting where it's all culturally so new and not actually a place for education. I am gonna now come over to our third contributor. Thanks so much. Louise Regan is a primary school teacher. We are so pleased to have you with us tonight, Louise. Talk to us about your thoughts on the potential widening of school openings on the 1st of June, please.
I will do, and thanks, Laura, and thanks for inviting me, and fantastic contributions so far. It gives a real clear picture about people's concerns, particularly parents. I'm glad you talked about the widening school open, because I was going to start by saying it's really important that people know that most schools are open, for key worker children and for vulnerable young people. And teachers, education workers are in those schools supporting those people, but also working at home, supporting children and young people that are learning from home. So, it's not that education isn't being provided, people are doing the very best they can. And actually, there was a whole debacle with the free school meals vouchers, and I'm sure you will have talked about this on your show at one point. but a primary teacher spoke to me about the fact that she was driving around delivering food parcels because they couldn't get vouchers for their vulnerable families. So we know that teachers and workers are out there doing everything they can to support those people. I think, you know, lots of us were very shocked when the government announced on the Sunday that they were opening to reception year 1 and year 6 in primary for a whole host of reasons, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then on the Monday, they came out and added nursery children into that. And Cara's referred to that briefly, but, you know, there is a real difficulty with trying to implement some of the things that we need to implement to try and contain this virus when you've got those very young children in your settings. So, you know, I will talk about how I think that's going to roll out in our primary schools and infant schools, actually, more significantly in a minute. But I think Daniel pointed quite rightly to the union's 5 tests, and I think they're key to looking at what the impact is going to be in our schools. And those 5 tests are very short but very reasonable tests, I think. I don't think there's anything unreasonable in those tests. We do want a reduction in cases, and at the moment, figures this week are very similar to last week. There isn't a significant drop in cases at the moment, and that's very important that we recognise that. A national plan for social distancing. Well, social distancing is extremely difficult. It's difficult enough for adults. You know, I don't know. I go out quite a lot for a bit of exercise. Adults find it difficult to social distance, and we all get the concept of 2 meters. You know, trying to do that with 3, 4 and 5-year-olds. So for people who are on here who don't know what age reception year 1 and nursery reception and year 1 children are, that is, we're talking about 3, 4, 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. You know, Cara's pointed that out. Those children they won't remember. One of the advisors on the government briefing last week said, well, you just put your tables, you know, separate your tables out. There are no tables in a nursery setting. Children don't sit at tables and learn. They move about, they play, they interact with each other. Same in reception, same in year 1. We wouldn't expect those children to be sat in a formal table setting. So it's very difficult to do the social distancing, but it's much more than that, actually. You know, one of the things around containing the virus is things like regular hand washing. Lots of our schools will not have a sink in every classroom, and if they do, it likely has only got cold water. What do we do about children going to the toilet? You know, I saw a letter today from a primary school that was saying that children wouldn't be able to go to the toilet apart from at their allotted times. Well, children need the toilet when they need the toilet. They need to be able to access those facilities. So that's a real issue. There's also the issue, and Cara raised it again, about, you know, nurturing our children and young people. It's very hard. You know, we all know when young children first come into school, they get upset, they get tearful, they need a lot of support emotionally, cuddles. If we're not able to do that, how are they going to cope with that change? They're coming back into a very different setting. There might not be the same amount of toys and resources. There are people saying we're going to have to put away all of those things. What are children going to do? If we have play equipment out, it will have to be cleaned regularly. Who is going to be responsible for doing that? There are issues around playgrounds. Some of you may have seen there are pictures of playgrounds in other countries where they've got little boxes marked out, and children have to physically stay in those and aren't allowed to go out of that. And there's now all the talk of bubbles. So we keep children in a bubble, and they will stay with that bubble and move around school in that bubble. So have different times. And I think all of those things are very stressful, not only for teachers and education workers, those supporting those young people, but also for children and their families. It's a very different system of working, and that will increase stress and anxiety. And I think we have to remember, people are already stressed and anxious. Lots of us are finding it all very difficult, very upsetting, and very stressful. And it's really, really important that we recognise that, and we put in lots and lots of emotional support and advice for people working in schools, but also for those young people. I'm going to end with this. You know, I think we all know, you know, all of us want schools to be open as soon as possible. You know, people don't train to go into education to want schools to be shut. We want to get back to the job that we do, but we want to do that when it is safe. We don't want a spike of cases, because that will impact not only on our children and young people. We don't want our children and young people to get ill. We don't want staff in our schools to get ill. We don't want their families to get ill. We don't want our wider communities to get ill. But if that happens, if we open early and it's not safe, then that will impact on other services. It will massively impact on our NHS. And, you know, we have to look at the whole wider picture, I think, and it's really important that we put in place measures to protect everyone. So, you know, I think we want to get back out there, but we want to do it when it is safe.
And you clearly don't think it's safe on the 1st of June, and I would agree with you. One question that's been asked, Sean said, people talk, and this has been one of the main arguments of the government, Louise, that people talk about kids missing out by not being in, but the other year groups are going to miss out, you know, by their kind of argument. And so what do you think the primary motivator is for those particular year groups? Why have they chosen those?
I don't know why they've chosen those. I think the primary motivator of the government is to reboost, you know, to get the economy back rolling. I don't have any doubts about that. It's about a childcare provision, which it probably makes sense as to why they suddenly introduced on the Monday nursery. You know, young children have to be in school, but, you know, it is really important that we get people back into school. But as I said, it's important we do it when it is safe. And you know, I think people in education are very anxious about that. And I think Cara was right in pointing out that survey where only 5% of people working in education currently feel that it's safe to do that. That has to be a real factor. And actually, I've also had a lot of parents tell me that whatever happens, they're not sending their children back at the moment because they don't believe that it is safe.
No. And somebody said here, and you'll know this work and like this feeling, Josie said that she walked into a classroom today, all of the soft furnishings removed and only tables and chairs for 6 people. She could have cried. It looks so completely different, and felt like this isn't my room. She's just saying, how on earth are pupils with additional needs, some with disabilities, some with emotional and mental health challenges, gonna cope? This isn't surely a safe environment for those children.
No, and you know, that was really, I think that's really important that people realise that these young people who have been out of school, some of them for quite a bit of time now, will suddenly come back in, not only to a completely different environment, because it is going to look different and they're not going to have the familiar things that they were used to before. They may have to come back into different staff, because some of those staff may not be able to come back into schools because they'll be in vulnerable groups and won't be able to come back. They may not even come back in to be in a bubble with young people that they know. They might be in a different bubble, or the people that they know might be coming in at a different time. So it's a really, you know, I think it needs a lot of thinking, a lot of planning, and it is a real shame that there hasn't been that real engagement with people that want to think about it and plan it really effectively.
Thank you so much, Louise. Helen Field talked there about one of the reasons that she thinks they've chosen the very young children is so their parents can go back to work, because obviously some of the older groups could just be left at home if they're in the very later years of secondary school, for example, although I don't know the rules. I don't know the rules on what age you're allowed to leave your children at home, but it's a good point. It might be one of the motivators for those age groups, but seems to be the most difficult. We're going to go now to Sarah Kilpatrick. She's a secondary school teacher and a trade union rep. This must be an incredibly busy time for you, Sarah. It's over to you on your thoughts on the wider opening of schools.
Well, there are many things about the way the UK government have handled this crisis that have made me feel anxious, disappointed, exasperated. But nothing has made me feel quite so angry as when Gavin Williamson took the podium at the Daily Briefing last Saturday and positioned himself and his government colleagues as the unlikely protectors of impoverished children, standing against the wicked teachers who want to steal their futures and limit their potential. I quote, "There are some who would like to delay the wider opening of schools, but there is a consequence to this. The poorest children, the most disadvantaged children, the children who do not always have the support they need at home, will be the ones who fall furthest behind if we keep school gates closed. They are the ones who will miss out on the opportunities and chances in life that we want all children to benefit from what teachers do for them and what schools can deliver for them. Let me briefly outline some of the things this government and their coalition partners have done for children. 1,000 Sure Start centres closed, 800 libraries closed, EMA scrapped, child benefit capped, mental health services decimated, the bedroom tax imposed, an exponential rise in insecure work, meaning parents and carers are out of the house more than ever, a tax on disability welfare claimants and their rights to their benefit payments, causing immeasurable stress to them and their loved ones, and of course, the largest cuts to education spending in 30 years, amounting to an 8% cut in spend per pupil. In real terms, this means that we are having to try and educate 700,000 more children with no extra money since 2009. Last year, the National Education Union surveyed thousands of school leaders, teachers and support staff. 9 out of 10 reported that poverty and low income were having a detrimental effect on their pupils' education. Joint General Secretary Dr. Mary Bousted said the government must stop blaming schools for the impact of its austerity policies upon the most vulnerable in our society and take action to alleviate the suffering of the increasing numbers who are living in poverty. This came mere months after the government had chosen to dismiss the damning report by Professor Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, who pointed out that in the 5th largest economy, the UK has child poverty rates of as high as 40%. In his unflinching report, he said, for almost 1 in every 2 children to be poor in 21st century Britain is not just a disgrace, but a social calamity and an economic disaster all rolled into one. With levels of inequality so severe that our country has come to the attention of such a body, it can sadly come as no surprise that at the beginning of this month, it was reported that those living in the poorest parts of England and Wales were dying of COVID-19 at twice the rate of those in the richest areas. The links between poor health and poverty are well documented, meaning the comorbidities which make COVID-19 more deadly are more prevalent in deprived areas. Nick Stripe, Head of Health Analysis from the Office for National Statistics, said, people living in more deprived areas have experienced COVID-19 mortality rates more than double those living in less deprived areas. General mortality rates are normally higher in more deprived areas, but so far, COVID-19 appears to be taking them higher still. Knowing that underlying health conditions such as asthma, diabetes and obesity are more common amongst disadvantaged communities is only part of the problem. The families who will rely most on the schools opening more widely are the families who won't have the luxury of being able to work from home. Instead, they are the people that the Prime Minister encouraged to get back to work last week, the lowest paid workers in the least secure employment, for whom the death toll has been disproportionately high. If this crisis has taught us nothing else, it has certainly left us in no doubt about who our key workers truly are. The heroic actions of the workers on the front line of the NHS, the staff in care homes and the nurses in the community have shown us all what bravery truly is. But for too long, we have overlooked the cleaners, bus drivers, bin collectors and shop assistants that keep our country going. Tragically, the ONS charts the COVID-19 related death rate of these workers as disproportionately high. And yet, despite the daily death toll still standing in the hundreds, the government want the schools back open so that the country can get back to work. Those who can work from home will continue to do so, meaning that those who are going back out to work are more likely to be in insecure, lower paid occupations. It is clear that the priority of this government is not to ensure the safety of its people, but to ensure the health of the economy at any cost. The children I teach are from one of the most deprived and impoverished areas in the country. Over the last decade, the school I work in has seen redundancies, increased class sizes, and the loss of support staff. Several subjects have vanished from the curriculum. I began working in 2009, and the changes since then have left it unrecognisable. The devastation this government have inflicted on communities like that of my school have had an enormous impact on the learning going on within. One of the first signs I had that things were going to change very rapidly after 2010's election was during a conversation with a student in year 11. When I asked her whether she'd be staying on to study my subject for A-level, she replied sadly, "I can't, miss. They've stopped EMA, so I can't afford to." Austerity measures imposed over the last decade have seen all of the support structures that used to prop up families in need stripped away. Family services, early intervention, youth services and benefit cuts mean that we're seeing more and more children living in poverty. And despite the enormous challenges schools themselves are facing, they have been left to pick up the pieces in this purposeful fracturing of society. Because that's what it is, purposeful. Austerity was a cynical political choice. The cost saving is merely a financial bonus in the pursuit of their true goal, the total decimation of frontline services, the removal of all support structures, the limitation of education, and the end of legal aid. Everything they have done since getting into power has been an ideological assault on the poor. They've set about destroying the aspirations and ambitions of every poor and working class child in the country, and they have been relentless in their aim. So no, Mr. Williamson, you do not get to use the poverty your government inflicted on these children as a political weapon for economic gain. These are families you have failed for the last decade, children whose life chances you have limited since before they were even born. I'll be honest, this has been extraordinarily difficult to write, not only because of the deeply upsetting inequality the research I undertook lays bare, but because there is simply too much to squeeze into a short speaking slot. What this government and their coalition predecessor have done to our country is unforgivable. Nothing they can do or say will ever make me believe that they have the best interests of the people of this country at heart. No fine words from the Education Secretary on a Saturday afternoon will ever convince me that they care for the students I teach, or reassure me that it's safe for them to return to my classroom. So I say to Mr. Williamson and his colleagues, suddenly so keen to address the concerns most of us have been raising these last 10 years, welcome. You can start by reversing the cuts you've imposed on state education, and then perhaps reinstate the community support systems you removed. But you don't get to force children back into school during a pandemic just so that their family can get back to work, while pretending that you're doing it with their best interests at heart. When it is safe for children to return to school, we will do what we've always done. Absolutely everything in our power to give children everything they need to succeed in life, despite the limitations forced upon them by successive Conservative governments.
Oh, Sarah, I can feel the kind of just the frustration, the pain, the just kind of head in your hands at this point, to be honest. And you're right that it being, them talking, I mean, the government talking about the welfare of children seems so, well, it's just like a slap on the face, isn't it? When we have been saying for the last decade, will you stop taking money from services for children? The 2-child limit, the cap on benefits, the kind of the crushing endemic poverty pay, and all of a sudden, as you quite rightly pointed out, there is concern for the welfare of children. We just don't buy it at all. Sarah, I mean, do you think that anybody actually believes that it is safe to go back to schools on the 1st of June, or that wider opening of schools? Or do you think it's this kind of crude way up of, I suppose, economic harm versus the harm of keeping schools shut and exposure to the virus?
Well, I mean, in terms of the general public, I think there is, in general, a sense that you want to trust your government and you want to believe that they're saying something is safe and therefore it is safe. And that's not something that, I would ever sneer at. I think that's right. You should be able to trust the people who are in power in your country. But the sad fact is, I don't, and I don't think anybody else should. I do think that what they're doing is lying to us, telling us it's safe, suggesting that science says that children don't spread this virus, that children don't suffer from this virus, when all of the evidence contradicts that. So I think I don't blame people who do believe them. I don't blame people who want to send their children back. I don't blame people at all for wanting to reclaim some sense of normality. But at the same time, no, I don't trust them. I don't trust them at all.
And you're right. So I don't think anybody speaking here tonight, nobody certainly at the People's Assembly, would blame people for feeling that sense of urgency about wanting to get back to normal. I have a toddler. I would love him to be playing with other children. But of course, it's kind of those short-term pressing needs versus people's lives, essentially. And our final speaker tonight is going to be Kiri Tunks, and she is an NEU officer. She's also a teacher and a governor, and I'm really looking forward to what you have to say, Kiri. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Laura. I'm going to talk a little bit about how education staff have been trying to meet the learning and emotional needs of our young people during this lockdown, and also perhaps start a conversation about what that means for schools going forward, because I think our experience of this pandemic and teaching and learning through it has really taught us a lot of things. It's been quite a steep learning curve, really, and I think we need to start thinking about what is learning for, how do we meet the needs of young people, what are those needs, and actually have those needs changed, and therefore do we need to change what we're doing in schools. So, I mean, I think it would be no shock to anybody to say that educators have been questioning the government's trajectory on education in this country, and that we feel that they've been pursuing an ideology more about their own purposes rather than actually meeting the needs of children. But actually this pandemic, one of the upsides is it's actually allowed educators to experiment and explore different ways of teaching and learning, because we've had to. And actually there's been some quite good learning about that. We've been able to put the needs of children first, which, that should be the case for education always, shouldn't it? But it's not something that educators always have the freedom to do. So the immediate response has been a complete readjustment about how we delivered our curriculum. Obviously we had to deliver that through distance learning. We also needed to provide pastoral care, and it became very clear to us how much schools are relied upon in communities as that sort of source of pastoral care and social support. And actually also, as people have said already, lots of staff have been going into school to provide supervision and care for the children of key workers and other vulnerable children. So it's been a really real topsy-turvy world, and I think it's been a testimony actually to the education staff, how people have adjusted so well. But it's really taught us that schools are part of their communities, and learning is way more than what we do on a whiteboard. And we miss our kids really very much, and we know, I don't know if the kids miss us, but they miss their friends and they miss the hubbub of the school for sure. And we've been trying to provide a kind of replacement school life for them as far as possible. But one of the things I think that has been exposed is this myth that online learning is the answer, and that Google Classrooms will be the schools of the future, and that schools, traditional schools will be a thing of the past. And I think actually what's been proved is actually all the problems with online learning, not just access. I mean, the EIS, the Scottish Teachers Union, have done a survey of their members, and their members say that around 60% of their students are having trouble accessing online learning for one reason or another. Now, my experience as a teacher, secondary teacher, is that very few kids are accessing that online learning. So we've had to go back to paper and packs and sending stuff out in the post, but it's given us quite a freedom actually about what we do. But I think young people also find it very hard to be motivated in a family context. They've got other responsibilities. Many of them are living in overcrowded environments. They're kind of having to haggle for access to the computer with sisters and parents and so on, brothers and sisters. And I think also a lot of the students really finding it hard to be motivated, and they feel very isolated, and away from everything, and they don't have that constant kind of interaction with a teacher or a member of support staff that they're used to. So I think there are real questions there. We've been able to develop some really nice practices, and I think we really want to try and take those forward. Collaborative planning between staff online, really exciting imaginative tasks and learning, and actually really key, addressing the events of the real world. We've had to address what's going on, and we've had to come up with learning resources that try and help the students make sense of what's happening, and that's not something that schools often make time for. So I think that is really something that I would want to take forward into the longer kind of education system that we build when we go back. So what happens when we do go back? We can't simply just slot back into where we were. I mean, any idea, I think other speakers have made that quite clear, but it just won't be possible to do that. For a start, we believe that COVID-19 is going to be around for 2 years or more. So we're going to have to do some quite long-term planning and some quite long-term adjusting. And the curriculum as it was, I don't think it ever was entirely what the young people needed, but it certainly isn't what they need now in the current environment. We're going to need a curriculum which is flexible, that's responsive, and that is actually transformative for those young people. So there are things that we need to do in the immediate term. Some people have talked about those already. but there are things that actually we can take forward in the longer term. So we've talked about flexible curriculum, but it needs to be a recovery curriculum that addresses the trauma actually and the emotional needs of our young people when they go back. There will be behaviour issues when we go back to school, and we are going to have to arrange our schools to make sure that we are, you know, helping those young people to cope with all those things. The rigid authoritarian regimes, they're not going to work. You know, they are not going to meet our young people's needs. So we're going to have to really think about making sure we've got strong pastoral strands, strong PSHE strands. That's going to be hard with social distancing, you've heard, but we're going to have to try and make that happen. Young people will still be staying at home. We've got the problems with year 10 and year 12. They've lost, you know, a term or more, 2 terms of content. How do we make sure that any assessment for their end of course, you know, qualifications are fair, are reasonable, that don't, you know, don't disadvantage? There are certain groups that are disadvantaged by different ways of assessment, Black kids in particular, so that we need to look at things like that. And I think that starts to raise a general question about achievement and attainment and how we measure it anyway. So the issue of testing in primary schools is really quite clear to me. Get rid of it. We don't need it. It doesn't meet the needs of the children. It actually prevents and inhibits schools delivering the kind of learning experiences that young people need. So it's a no-brainer to me. Certainly we shouldn't be looking at it when we go back because it's not what kids need, but I don't think it's what kids need anyway. There's no rationale at all for the baseline test. There's no rationale for SATs. We should just say we're not doing them. The government needs to say they're not happening, and then we need to really consider whether they should ever be happening at all. It's not what our young people need, not now, not ever. They should all be scrapped. So we have to look very hard at the structure of the whole curriculum, right from early years up to sixth form. The cracks are already there, I think, before COVID-19, and we've been long calling for a different vision of education, because actually education was not suitable for the world we had before COVID-19, but the world has changed and schools and colleges are going to have to change too.
Thank you so much, Kiri. I'm going to bring everybody back in just a second because I want a general conversation now, but I'm so pleased, Kiri, that you talked about schools are open. I know a lot of teachers, obviously you know a lot of teachers, you are one. It's always on your mind. You're planning work. If you're not in work on a rota currently for key worker children, you're thinking about your children, you're in contact with them, you are planning work, you are trying to make sure that free school meal entitlements reach those who are entitled. You know, this idea, the attacks on teachers that you are somehow like lazy or not wanting to do your bit. I mean, how do you respond to that? What are you feeling from other teachers about what they're doing in this crisis already to pull us through?
You know, I think, well, to be honest, teachers are used to being, you know, misrepresented. I mean, you know, and it's very dispiriting, actually. And of course, what a lot of people in schools, it's not simply about trying to keep themselves safe. We understand that if you bring a lot of people back into a school or a college, you are increasing the potential for transmission. And in doing that, you're putting at risk people beyond that immediate school community. You're putting at risk the families of our young people. Where I teach, we've got a very high Black population. A lot of the families are living in very extended family homes with medical conditions and so on. Our young people will be very worried about the idea that they are taking home something that is going to hurt the people in their family. So our concerns as teachers and educators are about trying to make schools as safe as we possibly can for everybody, not just us in our school, but the community. And we're trying to find a way to do that in a really sensible way. And we wish the government would consult with us. You'd think they'd talk to us because we're on the ground, and try and get a plan that really works actually for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Can we have everybody back now? I'm just going to read out some of the comments from people who have been watching while everybody's coming back in. So Victoria Jones said, and I actually feel like this throughout the last decade, that it makes her so cross that schools are expected to solve all of society's problems whilst constantly being berated by the government. And it's true, isn't it? So you are now dealing with a global pandemic, you know, a very localized area in schools, on top of austerity, on top of pay freeze, on top of your terms and conditions being eroded, on top of colleagues being made redundant. I mean, it just sparks of, you know, absolute cheek to do anything other than praise you. One of the things, the very practical considerations that I've heard of is, you know, everything has to be clean, fair enough, but all new resources have to be bought for some schools, and you're already, lots of you, having to send out letters to parents asking for help for Pritt sticks and resources, and now you're going to be asked to buy a whole new set of resources that every single child needs to have their own Pritt stick, their own resource book. It's just so detached from reality. I've also heard of some schools really struggling to provide a hot meal because catering services, many of which have been outsourced, privatized, have gone bust in this crisis, so aren't actually able to provide those meals. I mean, just raise your hand. I'm going to bring you in. Tell me what you think of that. You're dealing with on top of austerity. Carrie, you're looking like you're pensive, ready to go.
You know, schools are setting up food banks to make sure that those young people are getting food. That shouldn't be an additional responsibility for schools trying to deliver learning in a pandemic. That should be, you know, why are we living in a country where we've got food banks anyway? But it certainly shouldn't be up to schools to make sure that the young people are getting something to eat every day.
Absolutely right. And Sarah, you talked about, and we have been banging on about this every week actually, but you talked about this impacting most on those who are already the poorest in society. And are you experiencing children that you know not able to get on the internet, not having resources at home, and other societal problems like that?
Yeah, this is a huge problem. My school are making up paper packs to send home. We can't rely on the idea that not only that students have their own laptop or computer, not only that students have somewhere where they can work that's quiet in their home, also the idea that students have access to the internet in their home, that's just not a given. And, you know, the government had pledged laptops and you know, internet access, USBs, and they'd promised all of this stuff. Well, we haven't seen it. There are head teachers that I know who have talked about having to make a list and rank the children who are the most poor in the order of need, because they don't have the adequate number of laptops that they need to be able to be sent out. So the DfE may have provided some, but there's certainly not enough. And the local authority have got some, but they want those to be prioritized. Imagine being that head teacher. Imagine having to make that decision to say, well, you know, I know this person needs it, but this one probably needs it more.
And Louise, I'm looking at you for this. Sorry, this is like pressure, but just explain to me, right, what teachers are right now having to do because of the guidance put out from the government. So what are they being expected to do right now? And what will the actual school look like when they go back?
Well, I mean, it varies from school to school. It's fair to say. The problem is not only, you know, you've talked a bit about privatisation of food services, but, you know, we have a school system that is being fragmented. So, you know, that's the other issue as well. We can call on local authorities to do things, but there are some local authorities that don't have many local authorities schools. So there's multi-academy trusts, there's individual academies. So because of that fragmentation of the service, it makes it very difficult. So it's different in different places, but you know, there are varying experiences. There are some real horror stories out there where teachers are being told that they've got to come in and set out their classroom. They've got to clean everything. They've got to take children to the toilet, and then after the children have used the toilet, they've got to clean the toilets before any other children can go to those toilets and use them. And you know, other examples like that. But you know, I think the important thing that has come across tonight from everybody that's spoken really is that we have to work collectively. We all want to go forward in a positive way, but we can't do that as individuals. We have to work collectively and fight for what's right for all of our communities really. So, you know, it is a really difficult situation. And I mean, I suppose the final thing I'd say really is, you know, and it's reiterating what I said before, but our young people are going to be coming back into settings that are going to be very different to those settings that they left, you know, when schools suddenly shut. And we have to support them. You know, we have to support the people working in schools because it's going to be very stressful for them. But we have to support those young people. They've been through quite a very traumatic experience in terms of this whole strange situation, but they're coming back into something which isn't their normal, and we have to do something. You know, Kira's talked about it really well, about that whole looking at what we want and how we want our education to be. And I think we have to have a much kinder, caring education than we've currently got.
And Cara, I want to know from you if there's like a parents' revolt planned or anything like that. What are you sensing from other parents that you're mixing with? Like, I'm sure you're on maybe parents' WhatsApp groups or mutual aid groups, and I just want to know, where are parents at? It's a too broad a question, but where are you at then? And yeah, unmute.
So I think that my sense from you know, what we would call mummy friends and parent friends seems to be this just total sense of what I would describe as suspended disbelief, you know, that we're actually being asked to send in our children into a school setting that, you know, no disrespect to teachers who have got their work cut out. I just can't even begin to imagine how difficult it must be, not only emotionally, but just all the planning and all the work that goes into something that's actually a really crazy idea to start with. And my sense is that this government hasn't actually got anything right yet. Like, literally since the very beginning, we had to fight for the schools to lock down. You know, we're still fighting for PPE, we're still fighting for, you know, testing and tracking and tracing. And it's just been a really long, hard battle to get the government to see things in a logical and rational way. So I think there is this kind of disbelief, but I think that's starting to shift. I think people are really starting to mistrust the government's ability. And I think the sense is that, to be blunt, the government is really, really incompetent. But there's only such incompetence that you can think, well, how much exactly can you get wrong, you know? And there comes a point where you have to consider the awful possibility that perhaps this is in fact ideological as well as incompetence.
Okay, so you think parents are starting to get to that point? Look, I know this is such a gross generalization, but we've been very conscious at the People's Assembly and in these programs of trying to bring people along with us. We've never wanted the government to fail. That would be counterintuitive. We've always said, however, that it's not just about bad planning, that there are ideological underpinnings to lots of the incompetence and lots of the failures. And are you saying that parents are lots of parents that maybe aren't kind of very political ordinarily are getting to that point too?
I think people who normally just ignore most of the papers, most of the politics, just, you know, carry on with their everyday lives, are actually starting to question why do these year groups have to go back? Why not just wait till September? Why not just wait and review it nearer to the time? If there's any doubt, actually, to pick up on something that Daniel said, you know, the death of one child is one child too many. You know, if there's any doubt at all, why are we even entertaining the idea? I think also parents are looking and seeing that, hold on, you know, the private schools, or a lot of the private schools, the big ones certainly, they're not reopening on June the 1st. So it does seem like, okay, so the wealthy people's children are safe and tucked away nicely, and that's all good. But the working class, the unskilled, obviously I mean
lower paid
workers, they all need to go back to school because, let's face it, they need to go back to work in the government's opinion.
Absolutely. And I've got a really specific question that I'm hoping that amazing collective knowledge can help with. So Lindsay's asking about the rota system. Children with mental health needs and with high needs, other high needs, and about the social bubble of 8, including staff. Can we still do a weekly rota of only 2 staff at any one time? That basically her staff can't mentally cope with doing full time the whole time, because number one of how the children are and the intensity of the children in that environment, essentially does there need to be a full staff complement when you're having these bubbles, I suppose, is the question. I don't know who's going to come in. Kiri, I don't know. Daniel, just talk at me. Yeah.
These are the questions. There are no easy answers to these questions. That's the truth. Okay. I wish I could say this is the answer, go away and make it happen. This is the situation the government has put us in by telling us we've got these kids coming back, not talking to us, not talking to the experts about what's the best way to do that, which are the best years to bring back, how would we manage this in a way that minimised the trauma for the children, and so on and so on. How would we do it so that it kept staff safe, etc. None of those conversations have happened because this government did not even tell us, did not even warn us that they were going to start calling various year groups back. So the contempt with which they've treated the profession means that we actually don't have the answers to these very good questions that parents and staff have every reason to ask. And that's why we're saying to the government, stop telling us what's going to happen, talk to us about how we do it in a way that makes everybody safe and that answers these questions, because this is a really good question and there's no straightforward one answer to it. It will partly depend on context and so on, but yeah, these are the questions we want answers to.
Which is unbelievable, isn't it, when you are many of you are involved in your trade unions and you can't answer that question, not because you don't know, but it's just so ambiguous and so kind of up to individual schools. Louise, come in.
Well, just on that, I mean, the other issue is lots of schools will have workers who can't come back in because they're shielding, they've got issues that prevent them from coming in. They are in the vulnerable group, they've got family members that are in the vulnerable group. So we can't say all workers will be available. That is a real issue, and that's sort of goes back to Kiri's point in that nobody's talked to people about this. It's just almost been flung at us and then we're left to deal with it, and that's very stressful. It's very stressful for schools and education establishments, but it's also really stressful for parents because they don't know what's happening.
Yeah, and just before I bring Daniel in, I think it is it's a weird situation to be in, isn't it, that it's not good enough almost to not reopen wider because people are all mentally so distressed. Like, why isn't that good enough? If you've got teachers sick with worry, teaching assistants, people, the cleaners of schools, for goodness sake, at the front line of protecting us from this virus, and children, children worried about going back out. How do they understand this hugely broad concept? There is so much solidarity, by the way, for all of you. And I mean all of you on the Facebook page. I can't really see anyone saying, get back to work, you work shy lot, come on, do your duty. Nobody's saying that. And so I think we have to be confident in knowing that the narrative push from sections of the media is a narrative to change minds. They're not representing beliefs already held. That's very important. Just a quick shout out to everybody watching right now. You're probably thinking, what does activism look like during lockdown? Well, we have on the comments underneath this live, we've pinned to that post a poster that you can download in solidarity with the teachers and everyone that works in schools and parents who are deciding not to, or not going to send their children. And the poster's about stay at home on June the 1st and to stay at home, save lives. So please download that, print that off, put that up in your window or wherever is legally permissible to put that up out there so people on their walks can see, but where it's legal, I don't know what you're allowed to do, by the way, look into that. So Daniel, I'm bringing you in now. really to talk about the mental health of children and teachers, and anything that any kind of feedback you're getting from people about I suppose just their sense of whether they want this widening to go ahead. Are there any teachers that are like, just let's get on with it, this is ridiculous, you know, the union's taken the wrong position? Are you hearing any of that? You're on mute.
Not really, Laura. In terms of like, you know, am I hearing anybody going get back to work from like the profession? Not really. Everybody's just really concerned about safety. But one thing I do think that the profession is fairly united around is that, like, when we do return to school, we're going to have a lot of trauma to deal with, not only with our staff but also our children. So, you know, we really need to be looking towards trauma-informed practice, and as Kiri was talking about, a completely different responsive curriculum, but that responds to the needs of our pupils. You know, you know, I keep thinking back to like my class last year when I was teaching in London, and you know, there's no outside space for the children, you know, being essentially under house arrest for however long at such a young age. We're going to have a lot as a profession to unpick with our children. So I don't think anybody is, you know, demanding a return to work before it's safe, although we all want to get back to work as soon as possible, well, you know, to full time as soon as possible. In terms of mental health, yeah, we're completely aware of the trauma that we're going to have to deal with, and that's going to really have to change how we teach.
Why do you think, I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this either, but what has the engagement been like? I know quite a lot of the National Education Union are represented here, but why has the engagement with the government and the National Education Union, like, why haven't they allowed you to write the guidance on reopening? Is it because you think that would delay proceedings? I mean, people are laughing because that might seem ludicrous, but you know your settings intimately. Sarah, what do you think?
They don't trust us. They have been at war with us these last 10 years. We are, as a profession, highly unionized, massively organized, like ridiculously organized. I mean, if you're mad at disorganized teacher, we are a force to be reckoned with, and they hate that. They hate that there's this, you know, group of people who know their own minds, who are experts in their field, and who disagree with them. And I think that's the key. They hate that. They hate that people disagree with them and that they know what they're talking about.
And Cara, you might, I mean, I don't know what your little one is saying, but Zoe Ferguson has just said, and this is the crux of the matter for me, that her little boy is 7 in the category who isn't expected to go back yet as he's in year 2, but he's really, really worried about going back to school as he thinks he's going to get coronavirus and that he might die. I mean, you know, there's some sense of reality in that, you know, not as dramatic and maybe as crude as that, but they understand that there are risks out there. The science isn't well understood enough yet to support a kind of categorical conclusion on whether it's, you know, safe or not to go back. That little boy has his own feelings. They should be validated. I mean, what about your little one? Are they aware of what's happening?
Well, I've actually got 3, Laura.
Sorry.
They're varying ages. And they're all, you know, even my youngest, is 8. And all 3 of them are savvy enough to understand that if you need to maintain 2 meters, how do you do that with younger children even? Do you see what I mean? How do you, you know, they just don't understand how that would work. And they also, it's just afraid. It's like, at home I'm safe. This is all very scary, but you know, my parents are here and I'm okay. I think the idea of forcing them back into a setting, and obviously I think it's really important to point out that we're very, very close to our children, all of us. They come from us, they are part of us, and they pick up on fear. When we are concerned, however much we try to put a brave face on it, they pick up on that. They know that we're worried, and we should be worried. And I think our children are right to be worried too.
And I'll repeat the point. It should be good enough that worry, is a factor that should be considered, and trust. Cara said that there is a question about trust here. Do people actually trust anymore what the government are saying? And that is an incredible place to be in when you have, and I've said it before, people like Piers Morgan, talking about the lies that the government are telling. We're just in an incredible position. I want somebody talked about Keir Starmer's position and the Labour Party, and I don't know if anyone has any answers on that. They said, let me just get to it. I think Daniel mentioned that the Shadow Education Secretary is kind of on point, is kind of in solidarity with your 5 tests. I mean, what would you want to be hearing from the leader of the opposition? And I suppose to kind of broaden it out as well, what do you want from activists? What will help us get what we want here? If we are all in agreement that things aren't safe, what's going to bring us to that point where we will get what we want? I'm going to start with you, Louise.
Well, I mean, I think Rebecca Long-Bailey has been very clear in her support of the 5 tests, and that's really important. And it's, I think, we could do with the whole party getting behind those tests, really. I know there is a Labour for the 5 tests campaign, and they've got a letter that they've circulated, and people should sign that up that are Labour Party members. I think, ultimately, all of us recognise, and I got very emotional when Cara just spoke then, because it is really upsetting. This is really, really upsetting. And we don't want our children and young people to be frightened. We don't want our staff in schools to be frightened. But genuinely, this week, I have had people phone me who are crying because they're so anxious that they're not going to be protected when they go back to work. And that is a terrible situation to be in. So I think, those 5 tests are very simple. They're very clear. They're not unreasonable. Nobody, people don't think they're unreasonable. So therefore, I think, as I say, Rebecca has fully supported them. We want other people to get behind those, and Labour Party members should get behind them in their areas and say, this is what we need. We need people to be supporting these 5 tests.
Absolutely right. And there needs to be unequivocal support of any worker in their demands in this crisis. It isn't all right to clap people and feel good about yourself on a Thursday night, and we'll be clapping, just in under 20 minutes, but not then support the demands of workers. They're the same sets of people, and we can't say that enough. It is a right-wing tactic to pretend that they're 2 sets of people, parents versus teachers, key workers versus, the sloths that won't go back to school. It's the same people. It's the same set of working class people. Sarah, I'm coming to you. What do you need? What would kind of give you a boost in confidence? Think, right, we're going to win this. We're going to make sure that people are as safe as can possibly be.
I think we are winning this. I think we're speaking absolute sense. I think the message is getting through. And if you ever want, a suggestion of how hard your message is hitting and how successful your message is at getting through to people, just look at the backlash that we're receiving. When you get front page headlines, when you get double page spreads in newspapers, trying to find something bad to say about a group of teachers, it's just, the mind boggles. So I think our success can be measured in the backlash that we have received so far. If there's one thing that I'd really like Sir Keir Starmer to do, it's to tell Andrew Adonis to shut up. But beyond that, yeah, I'm good.
Just mute him, Sarah, on Twitter. Just don't look at it. I don't know when
It's like he's done something else. He said something else. I can't believe he's still talking. Yeah.
I know.
Just stop.
I'm not going to say any more on that person, but just check out some historic tweets. I'm just wondering when he was last in a school, last in front of a class, last wiping the snot from a child's nose. But anyway, most people are in complete solidarity, and we must remember that strength. I've had a message from Daniel that his little one has woken up, and as you might have noticed, he's just disappeared. These are the dramas of kind of home broadcasts. But Kiri, talk to me. What do you need? What are you really looking for from the movement, from your neighbours, essentially, in this battle to keep everybody as safe as possible?
Well, the first thing we would really like people to do is write to their MPs. We got our members to write to their MPs, and since the weekend, they've had 45,000 letters have been sent. We think every MP has received several letters. So if people could join in that letter writing campaign and really elevate our demands, that would be brilliant. And also, your council, your local authority, talk to them, because they have a lot of power still in terms of whether schools are open. And as Daniel said, I think lots of councils are starting to say we're not going to authorise school opening. So if you can work locally in your community to get councils to take that stand as well. If you're a parent, share your concerns with the head teacher. Say that you support the NEU 5 test, share what your concerns are about reopening, and build a bit of support for staff. And then just two final things, I think. Demand to see the science, and demand that science is interrogated by other scientists, so that we have an honest public debate about government policy, and that we can start to trust the government, because I think a lot of people don't trust the government. And we want testing and contact tracing, because if we're serious about getting the case numbers down, and that's the best way to make schools safe, that is what we need. And the government needs to do that really, really fast. So that would be a really big demand, I think, from the NEU.
And I think you're absolutely right in that it is very difficult. It's mentally very difficult watching the wasted time of this lockdown. Of course, it's a very expensive way for the state to deal with this virus, and you would have thought that in all of these weeks they would have put every single thing into a mass testing regime. And because imagine if every single person was able to get a test, I don't think anybody would be complaining about going back to schools, because we could isolate the virus and we could know that people would be much safer. Just on the letter, Kiri, just to let everybody know who is watching, there is also a People's Assembly template letter which is in support of the 5 tests and your demands. We're asking you the same thing. Just download it, put your name on it, send it to political leaders, to councils, councillors, elected mayors if there is them, and members of parliament, anyone who has influence in changing the government's mind. Cara, what do you think the keys are to success here? We obviously want schools not to be wider opened until it's safe. And how are we going to achieve that as a movement in solidarity with everybody who's having to take this decision?
Well, I think first of all, Laura, the 5 tests have to be fulfilled, as I've said, for me and other parents and teachers to all feel safe that it's the right time, and that doesn't feel like now. So I think that should be put off. This academic year is, as far as I'm concerned, an absolute write-off. And also, I would reiterate what both you and Kiri have said. If you haven't already done so, write to your MP. Write to your local authority, local education lead. Express your concerns. That is how we will see change, I think, when we start to really disturb people who are actually earning a good living out of being public servants. Well, let's remind them that they have a job to do and they work for us.
Thank you. And just kind of close and final words, a small short response from each person on this, please, before some last announcements and we go off after another Thursday night together. But if you had to kind of highlight or elevate just one point to convince somebody that was right now completely unconvinced about your arguments, what would that one point be? What would you say to somebody who is on the attack, if you like? Not that we're just bothered about them, but Louise, could I come to you? I know it's hard just to think of one thing, but we want other people to know how to argue for this.
I think for me, one of the key factors is that our rates are not reducing. And whilst ever our rates are high, we have to protect our communities, our health service, and everybody that is affected by this.
Thank you. And Kiri?
You know, I think for me, it's about dialogue. You know, if we are serious about collectively resolving this situation, it is no good the government going off and doing something behind closed doors and then coming forward and telling everybody what to do. We are much better if we work together, if we respect each other's expertise. And that is really what has got to happen, I think.
And Sarah, what one thing would you say to anyone unconvinced?
I would say that, you know, we have no hidden agenda here. We're teachers. You know, you don't do this job unless you love it. You certainly don't stay very long if you don't love it. We absolutely love what we do. We do it because we love children. You can trust us to put them at the heart of our argument. That's what we're doing. Trust the teachers. We've got no hidden agenda. We're doing this to protect you, your families, your children, and our colleagues.
And thanks so much, Sarah. And Cara, what one thing will you be saying to fellow parents out there?
I think for me, Laura, it would just be summed up with one word: doubt. You know, if there is a shadow of a doubt about schools reopening, that should be significant enough to delay the whole thing. You know, if this just saves the life of one child, you know, then it's worth doing, because the life of one child is everything. You know, it's amazing to me that we're all here having this conversation. It's such a no-brainer, I think, to everybody who's a parent, everyone who's a teacher, everybody here, everybody who cares about children. You know, if there is any doubt at all as to the safety of schools reopening on June the 1st, then delay. Talk, please. I would ask the government, please talk to the teachers, talk to the schools, you know, collaborate with them. Don't hit them with information and order them what they need to do. Collaborate, work together, find a solution, and please meet the 5 tests.
And if you're not convinced by now, I'm convinced, I'm sold. It's not the right time. And we want to rally around all of the teaching unions to make sure that they feel supported, to make sure that they feel like there's the broadest level of support. I don't think you'll be going back to school on the 1st of June or a wider opening, because schools are already back. Let's repeat that point. Every single contributor tonight has been outstanding. Thank you, Kiri Tunks, Cara Bryan, Louise Regan, Sarah Kilpatrick, and Daniel Kebedy, who had to drop out there. We are going to be back next week. Let me just make a couple of announcements first. So you might have been newly introduced to the People's Assembly through these programs on a Thursday night. If you have, brilliant, welcome. You are more than welcome, and we can't wait to meet you in real life when we're allowed. But we also know that you might be thinking, well, what next? You know, I can just sit and listen to this and it's great, and I'm kind of hearing things that I wouldn't hear elsewhere, but how do I really get involved? Well, save the date, because on the 20th of June, Saturday, is a People's Assembly National Activist School, where we are going to be having an excellent, and I've already heard, I can't say right now because they're not totally confirmed, but I've already heard of some of the speakers that are mentioned and some of the workshops that are going to be run, and they sound absolutely amazing. And it's not just going to be about theoretical kind of, you know, macro politics and the kind of theory behind all of this. It is also about how do we do this? So how do we organize local protests? How do we organize rallies? Why is protest effective? And communication skills, social media training. There'll be so much involved. So please keep a lookout for the registration. That's going to be announced this week. And don't forget the letter and the poster in solidarity with education and the teaching unions and their demands that you can download from the People's Assembly website. And last but not least, do not forget the interview with Noam Chomsky, which is going to be on Saturday at 7 o'clock from the People's Assembly page. Thanks so much for joining week in, week out. Solidarity with teachers, teaching assistants, anybody that works in a school setting, and parents, and of course children too. And we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.